It was dawn in the Texas desert, 1944. The sun had barely broken the horizon, casting long shadows across the barbed wire of Camp Hereford. Inside the crowded barracks, German prisoners of war stirred, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Outside, the smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling bacon drifted over the sand. Steam rose from mugs of hot coffee, carried carefully by uniformed American soldiers. The prisoners froze. They had expected the cold, hard rations the propaganda promised. Thin soup, dry bread, meager portions. Fear had been their constant companion. Instead, trays were being handed out laden with eggs, butter, fruit, and even a slice of pie. A group of POWs exchanged bewildered glances, incredulous. A young corporal picked up an orange, turning it in his hands as if unsure whether to trust the gesture. In that quiet morning, between the barbed fences and desert dust, something remarkable unfolded. Disbelief softened into curiosity, and suspicion hesitated at the edge of awe. For these men, the war outside had been brutal. But here, the enemy offered something unexpected: nourishment and humanity. By 1944, the war in Europe had reached a pivotal stage. The Allies were advancing on multiple fronts, pushing German forces back from France and Italy, while the Eastern Front strained the Wehrmacht to its limits. Millions of soldiers had been captured on both sides, and the fate of prisoners of war had become a pressing concern for military planners. The United States, having entered the conflict after Pearl Harbor, faced the monumental task of managing thousands of German POWs on American soil. Camps were established in isolated areas: deserts of Texas and New Mexico, the farmlands of Alabama and Arkansas, locations chosen for their natural security and distance from the front lines. Among these, Camp Hereford in Texas would become one of the largest, housing thousands of German soldiers surrendered during the campaigns in North Africa and Italy. For the German soldiers, arrival on American soil was a mixture of fear and disbelief. Years of Nazi propaganda had painted the enemy as merciless and vengeful. Many prisoners expected harsh treatment, overcrowding, or even forced labor bordering on cruelty. Instead, they were met by disciplined American guards, organized routines, and, surprisingly, generous rations. The Geneva Convention of 1929, which the United States fully adhered to, dictated humane treatment, sufficient food, medical care, sanitary accommodations, and protection from violence. While these standards were international law, they were not universally observed during the war. German POWs had already witnessed brutal camps in North Africa and feared the worst. The sheer scale of compliance with these humanitarian regulations in the United States became a source of astonishment. American logistics played a critical role, with domestic agriculture producing a surplus of wheat, dairy, meat, and fruit. The military was able to supply its camps without compromising its own troops. Each prisoner received daily rations that often exceeded the caloric content of an American frontline soldier's meal. Eggs, butter, coffee, and even fresh fruit were included when available. Seasonal vegetables were carefully distributed, and camp kitchens maintained a rhythm that mirrored civilian efficiency rather than military austerity. This provision of high-quality food was more than a moral choice. It was a tactical strategy. Well-fed prisoners were less likely to attempt escape, more cooperative, and healthier for the labor tasks they were sometimes assigned, such as farm work or maintenance duties. By investing in humane treatment, the United States ensured operational efficiency, reduced unrest, and reinforced the ethical standards of its military. Yet the effect went beyond strategy. The German soldiers could not help but react with astonishment. A corporal from the Afrika Korps later wrote in his diary, "We had expected to be starved, punished, perhaps even beaten. Instead, we are given oranges, eggs, and coffee. I cannot believe this is real." Many POWs described the shock of being offered desserts, fresh bread, and even small luxuries like chocolate or butter. A stark contrast to the meager rations available to civilians back home in a war-ravaged Germany. Cultural misunderstandings heightened the astonishment. Some prisoners initially suspected trickery, thinking that receiving good food might carry hidden obligations or surveillance. Yet, as days turned into weeks, it became clear that the Americans were adhering not only to international law, but also to a moral code that many German soldiers had never experienced. Medical care reinforced this perception. Sick or malnourished prisoners were treated in camp infirmaries with fresh linens, hot meals, and attentive nurses, a stark difference from the haphazard care many had received during campaigns abroad. This level of attention, coupled with consistent meals, helped POWs regain strength, and slowly, their fear and resentment softened. By the end of their first week in camp, many prisoners began to question everything they had been told about their enemy. The food was only one part of a broader system of humane treatment, yet it became the most tangible, immediate, and shocking evidence of a new reality. A simple breakfast could reshape beliefs, temper hostility, and open minds to possibilities that years of propaganda had denied them. In this early period, the stage was set. German POWs in America would soon confront moments of disbelief, moral reflection, and personal transformation, all starting with something as ordinary yet extraordinary as a well-prepared meal. The second layer of context extends beyond the initial shock of food and care. For the German POWs, America was not just a land of generous meals. It was a society structured in ways that challenged every expectation, shaped by war and ideology. Across the sprawling desert camps of Texas, prisoners observed routines that mirrored civilian life more than the front-line military operations they had endured. Barracks were organized and ventilated, latrines maintained, and work details scheduled efficiently. Prisoners were often assigned farm work, maintaining orchards, harvesting vegetables, or assisting in food processing. Labor meant to sustain the camps themselves and, in some cases, supply local communities. For many soldiers accustomed to the scarcity and deprivation of battle, this combination of work and comfort was bewildering. Food logistics in the United States made such conditions possible. The Army leveraged surplus production, transporting crates of fruits, canned goods, and dairy across hundreds of miles with refrigerated trucks and rail systems. Camp kitchens employed professional chefs and cooks, many trained in civilian culinary standards, to ensure consistency and quality. Each prisoner could expect 3 substantial meals a day, with occasional treats like fresh fruit, milk, or even chocolate when available. Compared to the starvation or rationed survival in wartime Europe, these meals were astonishing. German officers initially struggled to reconcile the reality with their expectations. Memoirs and letters from these men reveal repeated expressions of disbelief. Eggs were soft and plentiful, bread was warm and crusty, coffee was rich and fragrant. Some POWs even joked among themselves, comparing their circumstances to the pampered life of a city dweller rather than that of a defeated soldier. The cultural gap widened further when civilians or American guards displayed polite manners and casual friendliness. Greetings, smiles, and gestures of respect that were foreign in the battlefield context. The American approach was deliberately structured. Camp commanders understood that humane treatment was not only a legal obligation under the Geneva Convention, but also a tactical advantage. Prisoners who were treated well were less likely to attempt escape, more likely to comply with rules, and better able to perform assigned labor. Moreover, the humane conditions provided a form of subtle psychological influence. By demonstrating moral superiority, the Americans positioned themselves not only as victors in battle, but as exemplars of ethical conduct in wartime. This combination of logistics and ethics extended to cultural exposure. Many camps introduced German POWs to small slices of American life. baseball games, music, and occasional entertainment events. These activities were intended to keep morale high, reduce tension, and encourage constructive behavior. For soldiers who had been steeped in years of propaganda portraying Americans as brutal enemies, these moments of normalcy were deeply disorienting. Some POWs described feeling conflicted emotions: amusement, suspicion, relief, often within the same hour. The impact of these experiences extended beyond mere astonishment. POWs quickly began to understand that the United States was a nation capable of operational efficiency and moral consistency simultaneously. The contrast with Axis-controlled camps in Europe was stark. While German, Italian, and Japanese POWs elsewhere often endured malnutrition, abuse, or forced labor under harsh conditions, the American approach combined legality, comfort, and humane oversight. Letters sent home captured the tension of disbelief, as men recounted, "I expected starvation, not fresh milk and eggs. I could not believe it. They treat us better than we treat our own civilians." By late 1944, a pattern emerged. German soldiers adjusted their expectations and behavior. Complaints of hunger diminished. Attempts to bribe guards or hide contraband were reduced, and a cautious cooperation developed. Camp life became not only bearable, but, in some cases, a respite from the horrors they had endured in combat. Even hardened officers noted the transformation in morale. Men who had entered the camp with fear and resentment began to develop a grudging respect for American efficiency and fairness. Ultimately, this stage of disbelief and adjustment laid the groundwork for a profound psychological shift. The simple act of feeding prisoners well, combined with organized camp life and exposure to American civility, created conditions where German soldiers could experience humanity in the midst of war. It was a transformation that would ripple through letters, memoirs, and post-war recollections, an enduring testament to how small acts of care could challenge the expectations of even the most skeptical observers. The stage was now set for multiple perspectives to emerge: human reactions, tactical reasoning, logistical mastery, leadership decisions, and moral implications. These angles would further reveal how the seemingly simple act of feeding POWs had consequences far beyond the dining hall. For the German POWs, the first meals in American camps were more than nourishment. They were a jolt to the senses and the psyche. Men who had endured months of scarcity, muddy trenches, and rationed bread now faced tables laden with eggs, milk, fresh bread, and seasonal fruit. The aroma alone was enough to arrest them mid-step, as soldiers exchanged incredulous glances. Diaries and letters from POWs describe repeated astonishment. Some refused food at first, suspecting it to be a trap, while others hesitated, savoring every bite cautiously. Over days and weeks, this initial shock gave way to adaptation. Soldiers began to anticipate meals, to discuss the quality of the bread or the richness of the coffee. What began as disbelief slowly evolved into a complex emotional response, a blend of relief, curiosity, and grudging admiration for their captors' meticulous care. From a military perspective, the U.S. policy of generous feeding was a calculated tactical decision. Well-fed prisoners were healthier, less restless, and more compliant with camp rules. This reduced the need for excessive security measures, minimized escapes, and allowed the military to focus resources elsewhere. Officers recognized that providing nutritious, abundant meals was not simply an act of kindness. It was a means of maintaining order and operational efficiency. A prisoner who receives adequate sustenance is less likely to resist, more willing to work in labor assignments, and less prone to sabotage or unrest. In essence, the kitchen became a strategic instrument, where food was both a humanitarian gesture and a practical tool of military control. Behind the simple act of serving eggs and fruit was a sophisticated logistical network. Surplus American agriculture provided the raw materials, while refrigeration, canning, and transportation technology ensured the food arrived fresh, across vast distances. Camp kitchens operated with military precision, employing chefs and cooks trained to handle large-scale meal preparation efficiently. The use of standardized recipes, ration tracking, and careful inventory control allowed camps to sustain thousands of prisoners daily without compromising quality. This technological and logistical mastery not only impressed the POWs but also demonstrated a level of organizational competence that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the European battlefields they had left. Behind camp commanders were central to maintaining the balance between security and humane treatment. They strictly enforced Geneva Convention standards, ensuring that meals, housing, and medical care were consistent and fair. Some commanders went further, introducing small comforts, extra portions, seasonal fruit, or even occasional entertainment to maintain morale. By enforcing such policies, leadership created an environment where discipline coexisted with care. Reports from commanding officers note that consistent humane treatment reduced incidents of unrest, forged cooperation among prisoners, and fostered an atmosphere where respect for rules became natural rather than imposed. Leadership in this context was not only about authority, it was about creating conditions where moral and operational objectives aligned seamlessly. From the viewpoint of German officers and soldiers, American generosity was almost incomprehensible. Years of Nazi indoctrination had painted Americans as ruthless enemies, incapable of compassion for captured soldiers. Yet, here they were, offering fresh eggs, milk, and coffee in quantities the soldiers could scarcely imagine. The cultural shock was profound. Many POWs initially assumed hidden motives, suspecting trickery or surveillance. When the reality became clear, reports and letters reveal a mixture of awe and reluctant respect. Some soldiers even compared the treatment favorably to their own experiences as captors or occupiers, acknowledging that the Americans had demonstrated both organizational skill and moral consistency. This first section of angles demonstrates how feeding POWs was simultaneously human, strategic, technological, and culturally shocking, setting the stage for further exploration. The U.S. military's approach to German POWs was a tangible demonstration of ethical principles in practice. Beyond regulations and strategy, the consistent provision of quality meals, medical care, and respectful treatment reflected a deliberate moral choice. Soldiers and officers alike understood that war did not strip away humanity, even for the enemy. Feeding prisoners better than some Allied troops themselves received might have raised eyebrows among American soldiers, but it underscored a core belief. Adherence to ethics and law was a strength, not a weakness. The moral clarity of the American system left many German prisoners grappling with conflicting emotions. Some questioned the ideologies they had fought to uphold, while others developed a grudging admiration for their captors' commitment to human dignity. Food, in this context, became a powerful psychological tool. When prisoners realized the Americans' generosity was consistent, reliable, and without hidden consequences, initial fear and suspicion began to diminish. This trust fostered compliance with camp rules and labor assignments, but it also triggered a subtle psychological transformation. POWs began to see themselves not merely as prisoners, but as human beings under a system that recognized their basic needs. Letters home frequently mention astonishment at such treatment, with some soldiers writing that they had never known an enemy to act with such decency. Over weeks, these experiences shaped a new perception of the war and the people fighting it, softening hostility and planting seeds of reflection about morality, duty, and human behavior. For many POWs, the sheer abundance of food was also a lesson in the economic power of the United States. In a Europe ravaged by blockade, rationing, and destruction, fresh eggs, butter, fruit, and coffee were luxuries often unattainable for civilians, let alone soldiers. Experiencing this abundance firsthand created a cultural shock. Soldiers observed efficient supply chains, disciplined labor, and widespread resources that contrasted starkly with the scarcity they had endured. Beyond nutrition, it revealed the industrial and agricultural might of the U.S., reinforcing the perception that America's logistical capabilities were unmatched. These insights shaped their understanding of the broader conflict, the industrial balance of power, and the practical reasons behind American military dominance. The humane treatment of POWs extended into social interactions as well. Guards often engaged in polite conversation, civilian volunteers provided small gifts, and farm work introduced prisoners to cooperative labor with American workers. These interactions were carefully structured to maintain security, but provided the POWs with glimpses of everyday life in America. For women prisoners in certain camps, exposure to American culture, music, sports, and community activities offered a rare, sometimes shocking insight into life outside the war. These human connections reinforced the lessons learned at mealtime. Respect, civility, and shared labor could exist even in circumstances framed by conflict. The treatment of POWs in camps like Hereford left a lasting imprint. Former prisoners consistently cited the quality of food, medical care, and humane interactions as defining memories. Scholars note that these experiences contributed to post-war reconciliation, with many former POWs carrying favorable impressions of the United States back to Germany. Letters, diaries, and interviews reveal that the initial shock of receiving proper meals and respectful treatment often evolved into enduring respect for American military ethics. In many cases, these memories contrasted sharply with narratives of brutality from other theaters of war, creating a nuanced understanding of enemy behavior, morality, and the complexities of wartime conduct. By examining these multiple angles, moral, psychological, economic, social, and long-term legacy, the story of feeding German POWs in America is revealed not as a simple act of sustenance, but as a multifaceted event with strategic, cultural, and ethical dimensions. The pivotal moment of the story emerged not in a single battle, but in a series of interactions that shifted the dynamic between captor and captive. For German POWs in Texas, the climax was the realization that American authority could be both absolute and humane. By 1944, the camps were operating at full capacity. Tens of thousands of prisoners were distributed across the Lone Star State, with major installations such as Camp Hereford, Camp Hearne, and Camp Aliceville housing men from every branch of the Wehrmacht. Guards and officers had established routines: morning roll call, breakfast, labor assignments, midday meal, afternoon work or recreation, dinner, and lights out. The rhythm of life, enforced with military precision, was punctuated by moments of unexpected kindness: a bowl of ice cream, a slice of fresh apple pie, or a handshake and smile from an American guard. The first shock came with the Sunday meal events, designed to simulate holiday feasts. Tables were decorated and meals were served cafeteria-style, but with attention to presentation and choice. Prisoners could select from multiple dishes: roast beef, mashed potatoes, bread rolls, fruit, and a small dessert. Letters from prisoners described the overwhelming astonishment. One officer wrote, "I expected eggs boiled, bread hard and dry. Instead, I am eating as if in a small European inn. We could not believe it." These feasts became more than nourishment. They became a symbol of control, trust, and American superiority. The turning point deepened during labor assignments tied to local agriculture. POWs were sent to work on cotton, tomato, and citrus farms, often alongside American civilians. At first, suspicion dominated. The soldiers feared traps or punishment, but they soon realized that the Americans were consistent. Work was purposeful, hours regulated, and meals provided before and after labor. Guards sometimes shared small treats, joking in English and gesturing patiently to communicate instructions. The prisoners' disbelief turned to tentative trust. They began to understand that the humane treatment was not a trick. It was deliberate, consistent, and total. In May 1944, a notable event occurred at Camp Hereford. A shipment of fresh oranges arrived from California. Officers allowed prisoners to peel and eat them during mid-morning breaks. Reports describe groups of men clustered under the Texas sun, laughing, savoring the citrus, and expressing bewilderment that an enemy could provide such abundance. One soldier later recounted, "We could not reconcile this with what we had been told about Americans. How could they feed us so well while fighting our country?" The psychological impact was profound. Prisoners began to internalize the American capability for both efficiency and kindness, undermining the expectations of cruelty instilled by Nazi propaganda. The climax further intensified with a series of inspections by Red Cross delegates and American officers. During these inspections, the prisoners witnessed organized medical care, proper sanitation, and ample clothing. These displays reinforced the idea that American authority was governed by law and ethics, not arbitrary cruelty. Prisoners reported feeling a mixture of relief, awe, and confusion. Fear and hostility were replaced by reluctant respect. The turning point was psychological as much as material, reshaping the prisoner experience and challenging long-held assumptions about the enemy. A.D. Final moment of climax occurred when a labor crew was invited to observe an American baseball game arranged by camp officials. German soldiers, many of whom had never seen the sport live, were given front-row seating, cold drinks, and snacks. They watched with astonishment as players moved effortlessly across the field, cheered by civilian spectators who treated them with casual friendliness. Letters later described a sense of cultural shock combined with admiration. For many POWs, this was the ultimate evidence that the United States was a nation capable of blending military control with humane treatment, creating a turning point in both perception and morale. By the summer of 1944, the cumulative effect of meals, labor, recreation, and inspections had fully transformed the prisoner experience. German soldiers no longer feared immediate punishment or starvation. They began to comply more willingly with rules, engaged more constructively in work, and even participated in cultural exchanges. What began as disbelief had evolved into recognition. The Americans were both capable and morally steadfast, a combination that left an indelible mark on those who had expected only cruelty. The stage was now set for the second part of the climax, where these transformations would intersect with official inspections, correspondence with families, and the final realization that America's approach to POWs reflected both power and principle, permanently altering the prisoners' understanding of the war. The pivotal moment of the story emerged not in a single battle, but in a series of interactions that shifted the dynamic between captor and captive. For German POWs in Texas, the climax was the realization that American authority could be both absolute and humane. By 1944, the camps were operating at full capacity. Tens of thousands of prisoners were distributed across the Lone Star State, with major installations such as Camp Hereford, Camp Hearne, and Camp Aliceville housing men from every branch of the Wehrmacht. Guards and officers had established routines: morning roll call, breakfast, labor assignments, midday meal, afternoon work or recreation, dinner, and lights out. The rhythm of life, enforced with military precision, was punctuated by moments of unexpected kindness: a bowl of ice cream, a slice of fresh apple pie, or a handshake and smile from an American guard. The first shock came with the Sunday meal events, designed to simulate holiday feasts. Tables were decorated and meals were served cafeteria-style, but with attention to presentation and choice. Prisoners could select from multiple dishes: roast beef, mashed potatoes, bread rolls, fruit, and a small dessert. Letters from prisoners described the overwhelming astonishment. One officer wrote, I expected eggs boiled, bread hard and dry. Instead, I am eating as if in a small European inn. We could not believe it. These feasts became more than nourishment. They became a symbol of control, trust, and American superiority. The turning point deepened during labor assignments tied to local agriculture. POWs were sent to work on cotton, tomato, and citrus farms, often alongside American civilians. At first, suspicion dominated. The soldiers feared traps or punishment, but they soon realized that the Americans were consistent. Work was purposeful, hours regulated, and meals provided before and after labor. Guards sometimes shared small treats, joking in English and gesturing patiently to communicate instructions. The prisoners' disbelief turned to tentative trust. They began to understand that the humane treatment was not a trick. It was deliberate, consistent, and total. In May 1944, a notable event occurred at Camp Hereford. A shipment of fresh oranges arrived from California. Officers allowed prisoners to peel and eat them during mid-morning breaks. Reports describe groups of men clustered under the Texas sun, laughing, savoring the citrus, and expressing bewilderment that an enemy could provide such abundance. One soldier later recounted, "We could not reconcile this with what we had been told about Americans. How could they feed us so well while fighting our country?" The psychological impact was profound. Prisoners began to internalize the American capability for both efficiency and kindness, undermining the expectations of cruelty instilled by Nazi propaganda. The climax further intensified with a series of inspections by Red Cross delegates and American officers. During these inspections, the prisoners witnessed organized medical care, proper sanitation, and ample clothing. These displays reinforced the idea that American authority was governed by law and ethics, not arbitrary cruelty. Prisoners reported feeling a mixture of relief, awe, and confusion. Fear and hostility were replaced by reluctant respect. The turning point was psychological as much as material, reshaping the prisoner experience and challenging long-held assumptions about the enemy. AD. Final moment of climax occurred when a labor crew was invited to observe an American baseball game arranged by camp officials. German soldiers, many of whom had never seen the sport live, were given front-row seating, cold drinks, and snacks. They watched with astonishment as players moved effortlessly across the field, cheered by civilian spectators who treated them with casual friendliness. Letters later described a sense of cultural shock combined with admiration. For many POWs, this was the ultimate evidence that the United States was a nation capable of blending military control with humane treatment, creating a turning point in both perception and morale. By the summer of 1944, the cumulative effect of meals, labor, recreation, and inspections had fully transformed the prisoner experience. German soldiers no longer feared immediate punishment or starvation. They began to comply more willingly with rules, engaged more constructively in work, and even participated in cultural exchanges. What began as disbelief had evolved into recognition. The Americans were both capable and morally steadfast, a combination that left an indelible mark on those who had expected only cruelty. The stage was now set for the second part of the climax, where these transformations would intersect with official inspections, correspondence with families, and the final realization that America's approach to POWs reflected both power and principle, permanently altering the prisoners' understanding of the war. The consequences of America's treatment of German POWs in Texas extended far beyond the immediate well-being of the prisoners. Camps such as Hereford, Hearne, and Camp Aliceville became models of ethical military administration, demonstrating that humane treatment could coexist with strict control and operational efficiency. Reports from camp commanders consistently highlighted the dual benefits. Prisoners remained compliant, labor productivity increased, and incidents of unrest were minimal. The humane policies were not merely moral gestures, they were strategically advantageous. Prisoners themselves experienced profound personal and psychological effects. Letters, memoirs, and post-war interviews reveal repeated astonishment at the disparity between expected cruelty and received kindness. Soldiers described meals, medical, attention, and recreational opportunities with words like unbelievable, shocking, and beyond comprehension. One former POW recalled, "We had been told Americans were monsters. Instead, they fed us better than we fed our own families back home." This acknowledgement of humanity undermined the Nazi indoctrination that had conditioned them to expect cruelty from all enemies, creating a lasting internal conflict between loyalty to the Reich and recognition of the Americans' ethical conduct. The economic dimension was equally significant. Many German prisoners came from regions devastated by Allied bombings, rationing, and disrupted agriculture. The plentiful American meals, including fresh fruit, dairy, and meats, offered a stark contrast to scarcity in Europe. The experience highlighted America's industrial and logistical superiority, reinforcing the perception that the United States was capable not only of defeating Axis forces militarily, but also of sustaining a high standard of care for both allies and enemies. For POWs, the abundance was not indulgence, it was a demonstration of national capability. Medical care also played a pivotal role in shaping the aftermath. POWs received regular health inspections, treatment for injuries and illnesses, and access to proper sanitation. The low mortality rates in American camps were notable compared to other theaters of war, contributing to a reputation for humane administration. Prisoners recognized the value of preventive and responsive medical care, and many reported that the attention they received was far superior to what they had experienced in military hospitals back home. Beyond individual experiences, the broader social impact was significant. Civilians interacting with POWs, farmers, local volunteers, and community members helped foster an environment of mutual respect. Letters and post-war accounts often recall small acts of kindness, farmers sharing milk, children offering flowers, and Americans engaging prisoners in cultural or recreational activities. These interactions humanized the conflict and created connections that extended beyond the formal camp environment. For many POWs, such experiences challenged their preconceptions of the enemy and contributed to post-war reconciliation. The stability and positive outcomes in Texas camps contrasted sharply with reports from other theaters of war. While German and Japanese forces often relied on intimidation, starvation, and fear, American POW policy demonstrated that power could be exercised effectively without cruelty. The strategic success of humane treatment proved that moral principles could serve operational goals, a lesson recognized by both military historians and former prisoners alike. This section naturally leads to the second part of the aftermath, where we explore the long-term consequences: repatriation, reintegration into German society, and the enduring memory of humane captivity as a model for ethical military conduct. As 1945 approached and the European theater drew toward conclusion, the focus shifted from daily camp life to repatriation and reintegration of German POWs. Camps in Texas began organizing systematic returns to Germany, coordinating transport, and issuing documentation. Prisoners carried back not only memories of captivity, but also a profound reassessment of American power and ethics. Many wrote home, detailing how their expectations of cruelty had been defied, creating a ripple effect that subtly influenced post-war perspectives in Germany. The process of repatriation itself highlighted America's organizational superiority. Rail and sea transport were coordinated with meticulous attention to safety, timing, and comfort. Prisoners traveled in relative security, with access to adequate food and medical supervision. Former POWs later recalled the contrast with chaotic evacuations in Europe, another testament to American logistical precision. Letters sent to families expressed astonishment at the care shown during transport, reinforcing the lasting impression that America had combined efficiency with moral responsibility. Reintegration into German society was complicated by the war's destruction and social upheaval, yet many former prisoners carried with them the memory of humane treatment as a model for rebuilding. Their experiences in Texas informed post-war interactions, from personal anecdotes to involvement in civil service, highlighting that humanitarian practices in captivity could shape broader cultural understanding. Veterans of the camps often recalled lessons in respect, order, and ethical behavior, influencing their approach to authority and community in the post-war era. The broader military and historical significance was equally notable. American adherence to the Geneva Conventions became a reference point for subsequent conflicts, illustrating that ethical treatment of prisoners could coexist with operational effectiveness. Military historians frequently cite Texas POW camps as examples of how humane policies support discipline, reduce unrest, and enhance national reputation. The success of these camps also served as a diplomatic signal. By treating enemy soldiers with dignity, the United States projected moral authority and demonstrated that its victory was grounded not only in firepower, but also in principled governance. Furthermore, the experiences of these prisoners contributed to cultural exchange and understanding. Some POWs interacted with local communities in ways that left lasting impressions on both sides. German soldiers learned aspects of American life, agriculture, cuisine, sports, and social customs, while Americans gained insight into German perspectives. This exchange, subtle though it was, planted seeds for post-war reconciliation. Former POWs often spoke positively about the communities they encountered, recalling moments when fear was replaced by trust and suspicion by mutual respect. By the end of the war, the combination of humane treatment, logistical competence, and structured oversight had produced a unique outcome. Prisoners left Texas physically healthy, psychologically transformed, and culturally enlightened. They returned to a Europe in ruins, but carried with them a profound understanding that America's strength lay not only in its military might, but also in its ability to exercise power with principle. The aftermath sets the stage for reflection, understanding why these experiences mattered, not just to those who lived them, but to history, ethics, and the broader narrative of World War II. The story of German POWs in Texas offers a profound insight into the intersection of power, ethics, and humanity in wartime. In a world defined by destruction, fear, and suspicion, the American approach to captivity demonstrated that strength need not rely solely on force. By combining logistical mastery with ethical governance, the United States created an environment where compliance was achieved through respect and care, not brutality. These camps revealed a different kind of victory, one that was psychological, moral, and cultural. Soldiers who had been conditioned to expect cruelty discovered dignity instead. They tasted abundance, witnessed fairness, and experienced gestures of kindness that challenged long-held beliefs. The impact was lasting. Many prisoners returned, home with a transformed perception of America, carrying with them stories of humane treatment that contrasted sharply with the horrors of war they had witnessed elsewhere. From a military perspective, the success of these camps underscores a vital lesson. Humanity and operational efficiency are not mutually exclusive. Structured care, ethical oversight, and fair treatment enhanced stability, reduced resistance, and fostered trust, proving that moral conduct can be a strategic tool. The camps also highlighted America's organizational and industrial prowess, which enabled it to sustain high standards of life for thousands of enemy soldiers, even amid a global conflict. Beyond the immediate military and logistical implications, the Texas POW experience holds a broader human significance. It reminds us that even in the darkest chapters of history, empathy, respect, and dignity can leave a profound mark. These moments illuminate the potential for compassion to coexist with power, shaping both individual lives and collective memory. In the end, the tale of German POWs in Texas is more than a historical footnote. It is a testament to principled strength, cultural understanding, and the enduring human capacity for moral action. The echoes of these experiences reverberate far beyond the barbed wire of the camps, offering timeless lessons about leadership, ethics, and the possibility of humanity amid war.